Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and dear audience. On behalf of Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada, I welcome all of you to the fourth episode of our webinar on Ukraine war. It is absolutely an unfortunate episode of our human history that over 4 weeks, we all witness the horrific war of aggression of Russian Federation in the independent state of Ukraine. When we mourn, we also would like to contribute in terms of intervention and end of the war. With this little introduction, dear audience, let me do the treaty recognition. Conflict and Resilience Research Institute Canada is located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Dear audience, our today's webinar title is Ukraine War and Role of the Faith-Based Groups. Today we are privileged and honored to have with us two distinguished panelists. First, Reverend John Pawlikowski from Chicago and Father Taras Koch from Winnipeg. I shall briefly introduce them when they are invited to take the floor. But before I go, let me share with you the latest update from Member of the Parliament from Ukraine, Sofia Fedina. Ladies and gentlemen, you might remember in episode 1, we aired a full-length interview and shared her thoughts about the Ukraine war. Now it is time to share what is the update that she has sent for us, and have a listen.
Good morning, everyone from Kyiv. My name is Sofia Fedina, and I'm a member of Ukrainian Parliament. And behind me is a part of the memorial of Heavenly 100 to the memory of those who sacrificed their lives during the Euromaidan and Revolution of Dignity. Today, everyone in the world is discussing how it is the months of Moscow aggression in Ukraine. First of all, I would like to underline, this is not the aggression, this is not a crisis, and this is not a situation in Ukraine. And moreover, it's not the Ukrainian war with Moscow Federation. First of all, we have to be honest with the definitions. And the right definition is the full-scale Moscow Federation invasion into Ukraine. The war that Moscow Federation wages against Ukraine on Ukrainian territory. And Ukraine is only defending its right to be. It's defending its territory. And our army is defending our people. The next important point is, and I know that this is a big discussion, but it's not the months of the Moscow war against Ukraine. We can say that on the 24th of February, the full-scale invasion started, but the war started earlier. Furthermore, to my point of view, the war started not on the 20th of February 2014. We just seen the military actions against Ukraine, with which the rest of the world was deeply disturbed, but did nothing to punish the aggressor. The full-scale war of Moscow Federation against Ukraine started many, many decades ago. And I can recall just the 20th century on the example of my own family, when the majority of my mother's family was exterminated by Moscow communists during the Great Famine of 1932-1933. They are being buried just nearby Kharkiv, that is almost demolished by Moscow army. The same Kharkiv that at some point supported Moscow vector of development of Ukraine. Now everyone in Kharkiv, both dead and alive, hate Moscow Federation to the very last point. The Moscow war against Ukraine also reflected in the deportation of my people from Lemkivshchina. Deportation to the very far, far east territories of Ukraine and Soviet Union. And that was the extermination of people as well, because only they were Ukrainians. The war of Moscow Federation against Ukraine, it was being waged in 1980s, when, for example, my grandfather was persecuted just because of being Ukrainian priest. And my father and mother were persecuted to be the relatives to the priest. That was the time when I was born. But I would like to remind everyone the words of Lenin when he created the Great Famine of 1921-22, when he said, the more Ukrainians we exterminate with hunger today, the less we will have to shoot later. That is what Moscow reality does. And I would like to remind everyone about the killed musicians, painters, historians, producers, poets in 1930s, in 1960s, in 1970s and 1980s. I would like to remind everyone in this world about persecutions, deportations, Gulag, Sandarmokh, Vorkuta, and many other places where Ukrainians and other nations were exterminated just because the Soviet regime did not like the people who want to be free. I want to remind everyone, why do we have this war today? Because the civilized world never managed to say that the communist totalitarian regime was even worse than Nazis, that it exterminated millions and millions of people. And we were tolerating all that Soviet stuff. We were tolerating communist and totalitarian Moscow with its Putin just because someone conquered Nazis. But Moscow Federation, Muscovites with Soviet Union, together with Nazis, started the Second World War with Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. Today, on international TV, I was asked what to do now, and we are on the verge of the nuclear war. Ukraine has to find some points to stop the war. Not Ukraine has to find some points or some possibilities to stop the war. Everyone in this world, every civilized country should find out the way to stop Moscow Federation. Ukraine is not the only country to pay the price. In case Ukraine loses, everyone will be next. And finally, we have to say the truth. Not Ukraine started the war. And Ukrainians' neutrality or demilitarization will not resolve the situation. We have to stop Moscow Federation, and we have to stop Putin. Otherwise, this war will last forever, or these invasions will continue with any next generations. Ukrainians paid too much through the centuries in their resistance to Moscow or to Moscow terrorists, to Moscow murderers. And we are not going to pay more. We are going to fight till our Ukrainian victory, till the end of Moscow Federation. Glory to Ukraine. Good morning, everyone from Kyiv.
So it's a very powerful message from Honorable Member of Parliament from Ukraine, Sofia Fedina. She gave us a very broad overview of the backdrop of the war, the historical oppression of Ukraine in a context. And also she mentioned particularly the role of us, those who are outside Ukraine, and what we could do. And I think that kind of lays the background of today's our webinar. And at this point in time, dear audience, let me read out a statement from Parliament of the World's Religion, titled Statement on the Illegal Invasion of Ukraine. As many of you know, the Parliament of the World Religions has more than 128 members in their group, and also 28 plus faith groups have joined together. And very recently, they have released a statement. I'll just read a very brief excerpt from their website. And the way the Parliament announces that, and I quote here, We mourn the lives lost and the continued suffering of those involved in the invasion, including those who remain in Ukraine and those who displaced by the invasion. We ask that the human rights and humanity of all refugees and displaced people in this crisis be respected and upheld regardless of their country of origin. It also says, and I quote again here, we stand with the Ukrainian people and we call upon all people of faith, conscience, and goodwill to do the same. The parliament implores the interfaith movement around the world and individuals of faith, conscience, and goodwill to stand in resolve against all acts of war and violence and advocate for peaceful diplomacy. The Parliament of the World's Religion remains committed to a culture of non-violence and respect for life as declared in our signature document towards a global ethics. And persons who hold political power must work within the framework of a just order and commit themselves to the most non-violent, peaceful solution possible. And they should work for this within an international order of peace, which itself has need for protection and defense against perpetrators of violence. Armament is a mistaken path. Disarmament is the commandment of the times. Let no one be deceived. There is no survival for humanity without global peace, unquote. Again, a very powerful message. The audience, you might be also knowing that Russian Patriarch Kirill's blessings of Moscow's invasion of Ukraine has already divided Orthodox Church and drawn criticisms from Christians of every tradition. In a recent sermon, the Russian Orthodox Church justified the invasion because they found that Ukraine is full of liberal foreigners who hold gay parades as a test of loyalty. So, dear audience, with this context, now let's focus to our distinguished speakers now. And let me have the privilege to introduce first Reverend John Pawlikowski, Servite priest. Father Pawlikowski is a professor of social ethics and co-founder of the Catholic Jewish Studies program at Catholic Theological Union and a leading figure in the Christian-Jewish dialogue. President Reverend Mark Francis remarked that the witness of Father Pawlikowski in improving Catholic-Jewish relation has long been an inspiration for us at the CTU University. Father Pawlikowski is a founding member of the United States Holocaust Memorial Council and until 2012 was the chair of its Committee of Ethics, Religion, and the Holocaust. Father Pawlikowski is being honored for his commitment to the museum to the cause of Holocaust remembrance. He was awarded a Legacy Award from the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where more than 2,300 people gathered in downtown Chicago to commemorate the 25th years since the museum's opening. Ladies and gentlemen, once again, it's a privilege to welcome Reverend John Pawlikowski. Reverend, floor is yours, sir. Please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'm honored to be invited to this gathering to discuss a most serious topic, not only a topic that not only confronts us in the immediate time, but also has very significant long-range implications for, I would say, certainly for North America and Europe, but for the world at large. And let me say that I have been privileged to work with the Parliament of the World's Religions since its very founding. I would consider myself one of the founders, actually, that started the Parliament process to honor the 100th anniversary of the original Parliament, which took place in Chicago and which really opened the doors to a new experience of interreligious understanding in North America. I'm currently just off the board, but I continue to serve the Parliament in 3 major committees. And I also would like to just take this opportunity to offer a warm welcome to anyone who would like to join us for the next convening of the Parliament, which will take place in mid-August at the McCormick Place Convention Center in Chicago. And the Parliament experience is just something that is quite unique The last in-person parliament, in fact, took place in 2018 in Toronto. We did have a virtual parliament last year, but it's a virtual parliament can accomplish some things, but it loses the opportunity for real interpersonal sharing, which I think is so vital, not only for the parliament, but for humanity at large at this time in human history. To the point, I address it, the issue of the faith-based approaches to the war in Ukraine from the two, you might say, the two hats I wear. The one hat is that of a social ethicist, which was my professional discipline and the area in which I mostly taught at Catholic Theological Union. But I also have been deeply involved in Christian-Jewish relations. I was very much involved with the founding of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington. I really was involved with the very key committees that built that museum. And that also had, I think, enabled me to reflect, but also to recognize the ongoing implications of the Holocaust experience, many of which are, I think, applicable to the situation that the people of Ukraine face at the current moment. Let me say that I do resonate very much with two of the major points made by the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament in the video which we just saw. First of all, it has to be stressed that in one sense, this is a one-way war. It is not a war that was generated by two countries. Ukraine had did nothing to the Russian Federation. Ukraine was not threatening the Ukrainian Federation. Russia attacked it with no good reason and has been horrendous in its lack of any kind of human responsibility for especially the civilian population. I think the other issue, though, is that was also highlighted was that this is not the first instance of Ukrainian suffering at the hands of people in Russia. Now, you know, we all, I think, need to be careful how we speak about this, because I dare say, I think there are many, many people in Russia who have demonstrated a degree of heroism to go out and protest this war, despite the very harsh penalties that they face. And I think there are many more who may not have quite, were not able to mount that same courage to do something publicly, but still have serious questions about the war. I saw an interview on CNN yesterday, I believe it was, with a woman whose home was invaded by several Russian soldiers. And one of them was drunk and pushed her around, but they took whatever they could because they were so poorly clothed even. Some of them some of the soldiers took her clothes and used them because they were so ill prepared for the climate in which they were fighting. But then at the end, she said, after the one guy sobered up and they became more relaxed, they told her quite bluntly how much they disagreed with the war and so on. And I think we can see that from all reports, we can see that multiplied. And I think we do have to, as religious people, also have some sympathy for the many, many young Russian soldiers who don't even have much of an idea of why they're there, and who don't have any great incentive to fight, and their families. If the numbers of Russian casualties are anywhere near what some of the public reports have been, I mean, it's staggering, the human losses that the Russian people have experienced, and mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters of these soldiers now have an empty chair at their table. So I think this would lead me to believe that one of the major duties of religious communities in a period of, let me call it, aggression and conflict, I think it's to try, as difficult as it is, as trying as it is, to bring a certain humanization to the treatment of people who may be on both either side of the conflict. This does not mean to overlook those who are committing horrendous crimes, because as far as I can see, this hasn't been spoken very much. I have not heard in the international media, which is covering, I think, in an unprecedented way, this conflict. One does have to give offer great appreciation to many of these journalists who and media reporters who have literally risked their lives to tell us what is happening. And I have not heard a single report of any abuse of Russian soldiers, or of anything that resembles, even in the smallest way, a war crime on the side of the Ukrainian military and paramilitary. And I think it's an example that needs to be emulated of how it is possible to defend yourself and still retain a certain sense of humanity to those you are forced to oppose because they threaten your very existence as people and as a nation. And that's I think one thing that religious communities know. But we also, I think, have to be prophetic. Now, there's been a fair amount of discussion about the stance of Pope Francis. I think he's gotten stronger and stronger, but because, Pope Francis wears, in a sense, two hats. He's the head of the Catholic Church, but he's also the head of Vatican State. And I think, unfortunately, and I would argue, this was part of the problem during the Second World War, that Pius XII went too much with statecraft approaches rather than prophetic approaches. And I don't completely say that statecraft is not necessary here, but I think in this instance, I think the Pope needs to speak bluntly and use the words to speak of the Russian Federation, to speak of Mr. Putin, and let me say also the Patriarch in Moscow. I think the Pope, perhaps not by himself, maybe in concert with other Christian leaders, really need to do something dramatic to say, that the Patriarch is, I would say, in my words, disgracing the rest of the community, Christian community, and disgracing the teachings of Jesus. You can argue whether Jesus was a pacifist and whether he would countenance any form of warfare. But I think what's happening, the total disregard for human life that Mr. Putin has instigated is something that deserves the very harshest and clear-cut condemnation. And I think the patriarch needs to, the same thing needs to be said about the patriarch for his wholesale endorsement of the vision of Mr. Putin regarding Russia and so on, that stands at the base of apparently of the war aims of Mr. Putin. I would say one thing that should happen, the Russian Orthodox Church, Moscow Patriarchate, is a member of the World Council of Churches. And I think the World Council of Churches should either expel the Russian church, or at least, if you want to say, well, let's not expel it because we're then we're kind of taking action against the church at large, the members of the church, and what we want to do is really kind of take action against the patriarch and his position. They should at least be suspended so long as Kirill remains the patriarch and they do not remove him. I think that is the kind of prophetic action. You know, I dream and I feel this is may not be in any way realistic, but remember several of the presidents of the neighboring countries, including Poland, took a real chance, I think, by making a trip of solidarity to Ukraine. What about if major world religious leaders did the same as a witness? I think this would be another example. Let me just end here and let my colleague express his views, but let me just say that I think this conflict also does raise strong questions about what is the stance of the Catholic Church in particular regarding warfare. It has been undergoing significant change in recent decades. Certainly, I would say, especially beginning with John Paul II, and now through even Pope Benedict, but also certainly Pope Francis, there's been a strong emphasis about almost any kind of warfare being morally acceptable. But what do you do in a situation like the Ukraine, where it's not two sides starting a war, it's one side being viciously attacked with the intent of destroying it, and with no concern about any kind of moral boundaries, whether it's the killing of children, the destruction of hospitals, and so on. Is there a right of self-defense, and what are the limits of that? I myself would feel one of the most difficult questions in that category would be if, hopefully not, if Putin should decide to use tactical nuclear weapons, can NATO respond in kind? Would religious leadership support that exchange? And I'm not sure myself. I think we would need to have some serious consideration of that. I don't consider myself a pacifist as a whole, but I do consider myself a nuclear pacifist. But you know, the reality is we may have a man who knows no bounds and could do this. I would offer every prayer that sanity somehow, the Holy Spirit brings some sanity to him. or something. So I'll leave my comments there. Maybe I've raised a few issues that are worth further discussion. So thank you again for the opportunity. And I would say, God save Ukraine.
Thank you, Reverend John Pawlikowski from Catholic Theological Union today joining us from Chicago. I would say that it's a wonderful backdrop, and his insights are absolutely valuable to understand the conflict and conflict intervention, rather war intervention in the future. Thank you, Reverend John, for this wonderful speech. Dear audience, let us now invite our distinguished panelist, Father Taras Couch. He is a priest in Immaculate Conception Church of Cooks Creek, Manitoba, and also in Descent of the Holy Ghost of Beausejour, Manitoba. It's a distinct honor, Father Taras Couch, to welcome you to today's webinar. And we are going to listen very deeply from you, because you have a very well grounded family history in Winnipeg, which I just recently read your father's work and his contribution to the Manitoba and the overall faith groups in Canada. So Father Taras Couch, floor is yours, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Kauser, for the beautiful introduction. Myself, I'm very, very honored, first of all, to be born into a family that had actually taken me from being a child into understanding what it is to be a mature person, and also to understand a little bit about our Ukrainian roots. As I'd like to just begin by saying, first of all, my roots come from my grandfather in the beginning, and his name is actually Father Emilian Couch. He was a priest. But this, as you know, in the Ukrainian Catholic tradition and rite, we are able to be married. And so as my grandfather, his father was also a married priest. His name was Gregory. And he grew up in a small little village too, and continued on to becoming who he is and known for today. He was a Ukrainian Catholic priest who was ordained in 1912 and married a year before to his wife, Maria Dobryansky. And as time went on, of course, as we see what's happening in Ukraine and in Poland and Russia, Germany, everybody was out to get each other's land. It was one of those things that they wanted to be superior about. So in my grandfather's case, he was a priest who was in a little city called Peremyshlan, which is about 30 miles from west of Lviv. And in that little town of Peremyshlan, they had mostly half and half Ukrainian, Polish, and many Jewish people that were in this Gestapo type of a camp. And what happened was, when Hitler and the Nazis invaded Ukraine, they came into that little town where they had these many Jewish people who were living there. And they were doing what they do. They had their synagogues, they did their prayers. They were just, minor, just good to themselves and tried to help others too. But my grandfather had very, very much love for these people, because he knew how, the Nazis and Hitler wanted to just totally get rid of them, to genocide them, to just get them off the map, and which they almost did. And so at the time of the Second World War, he went and he spoke very well German too. He went to their synagogue as he heard that they were going to bomb it with Molotov cocktails. And so when he came to that little town there, Peremyshlan, in the Jewish town, they were praying, in their synagogue. And as the Nazis came in, they started throwing Molotov cocktails through the windows, through the doors. They started all on fire. And there was my grandfather, Father Emilian Couch, who went inside there and he started dragging these people that were on fire and pulling them out, trying to put out the fire to save their lives. And he yelled at the Nazi Gestapo, "Stop it, stop it." And for some powerful reason, maybe he prayed to God, they stopped. Many of those Jewish people died, but others he saved their lives. In that sense, he was kind of a hero. Those were kind of stories that I was told by my own father, who was a priest, Father Myron Koch, who was ordained a Ukrainian Catholic priest right here in Winnipeg, where I live today. And he told me many times he prayed on his knees, and he prayed every night. I recall just coming into his room and crying and crying. And I didn't really realize why he was crying so much. But later on, I understood the pain, what he had to go through when they arrested his father. My grandfather was arrested for baptizing Jewish people and harboring them, hiding them. And as you know, if you get caught in those days harboring Jewish people in your house, they would immediately take you and maybe even to the concentration camp. But in this case, my grandfather actually was taken to the concentration camp for a simple thing as baptizing Jewish people. And you would say, why would he baptize Jewish people? They're not so much into baptism or believing in Jesus as being our Savior. No, but what he did is when he took them to baptize them, he told them, you know what? This is a little teaching that I give you about Jesus. Now you can accept it or not accept it, but I baptize you. And he gave them certificates of baptisms. Why did he give them certificates of baptism? Is to save their lives from being executed and taken to the concentration camps by the Gestapo. So he wrote a letter, as many of us know even today, for war crimes that were committed maybe now by Russia, but also in those days by the Nazis. So he wrote a letter to Hitler, and he says, you know, exactly what those Nazis were doing to the Jewish people, and they arrested him for doing that. He came into his house with his 6 children, into the house, took them out, handcuffed them, took them to the police station, and they right away judged him for doing what he baptizing these people. And the Jewish people actually were able to escape the Holocaust because they ran for their lives with these baptismal certificates. And when they came to the border to escape to Canada or United States, on the ships, they would show their baptismal certificates saying, we're not Jewish, we're baptized, we're Christians. And some were believed, and they were set on the ships, and they came over to America and to Canada. He is said to have baptized and given to about 5,000 to 10,000 certificates of baptism. He would baptize them in masses, not just in 1 or 2 people at a time. He was given the right to do that by his metropolitan, who was Sheptytsky at the time, as my metropolitan is Lawrence Huselak here in Winnipeg as the Archieparchy. He was the metropolitan for my grandfather. So he says, well, if you're doing it, you're harboring and you're baptizing, we'll keep on doing what you're doing. But this is very critical. You know, you can die for this. But he didn't care. He did it because he believed in it. And when he believed in it, they had arrested him, put him on a train, took him on that train with all the rest of the Jewish people, just like cattle on those wagons, and he transported them to Majdanek, which is the concentration camp in Lublin in Poland. And there he stayed for a couple years, and they wanted to release him. The Metropolitan wrote letters, Sheptytsky, to release him, everything. And he wrote letters back to his children. Don't even try to release me. I'm needed here in this prison camp. Everyone who was here needs me. And he baptized, he blessed people. He said mass, and he gathered people together before they died. And people got to know him so well that they loved this man, this priest in Majdanek, whoever he was. But they loved him, and they cried, and they sang before their deaths, before they would gas them and then burn them and throw them in the crematoriums. So these are the kind of things that really affected me. And this world we're living in at this time in 2022, it's unbelievable. How can somebody in this right mind, in any mind, do something so catastrophic as Putin to these poor people of my country, my parents' country? So I, as a Ukrainian Catholic priest here in Winnipeg, I'm so proud to be here with my people and serve, the people of Ukraine and the new second and third generation to understand what our parents and grandparents went through during the war. So even here in Winnipeg, he was known as by the Jewish community as a righteous Gentile. He was given that plaque in 1999. So that is right now in the Jewish Community Center, where everybody recognizes him for doing what he did, during the Holocaust. So today I'm just I'm lost for words to think about the things that are happening in Ukraine right now, because it just breaks my heart and everybody in my church. But we pray just yesterday, on the feast of the Annunciation of our Blessed Mother, Pope Francis had consecrated in Rome Ukraine and Russia together. And there's only 3 other times that has happened, and the earliest it was done in 1037, and now here in 2022. So I think that the Pope, he did his best to try to, make peace and make people understand and pray to our Heavenly Mother, the Mother of Jesus, to help us. And we pray every day with the Rosary, because we feel special power from her, and for her to help us, during this time, because sometimes we don't know where else to turn. If we can't turn to God, to Jesus, to our Heavenly Mother, then who else can we have? And so we do what we can as people, just like Joseph told us. And we're very happy to hear what you say, about the war too. And I took that to heart, what you said. And so I'm just blessed to be here with you and to share those few little moments of my life with all of you here.
Thank you very much, Father Taras Koch, for sharing some of your personal history in this session. And I'm sure our audience are greatly benefited, those who are not very much aware of the background of war and Holocaust. And this is why we thank you very much, Father Taras Koch. Dear audience, let me now bring our advisors to the discussion, Gary and Dercia Senf. They are with us since the beginning, and we appreciate their support for this webinar as well. So at this stage, we are going to have a moderated Q&A session, and I welcome questions first from our advisors, Dercia and Gary Senf. Floor is yours.
Saying hello to the audience, and thank you for joining us. Kauser, this is a difficult evening because the stories are so visceral. So when we listened to Sofia Fedina, a member of parliament in Ukraine, you could feel the strength of her passion and the conviction of her soul in terms of what's happened to the Ukrainian people. She's in a very difficult situation. Member of parliament, a woman with an assault rifle, basically most of the time being spent in a bunker type parking lot at this time. So these are very real, very difficult, very visceral images that we're seeing there. So we maybe even should have started with a warning, that this is difficult material. With Father John, I would just say you're the master of the understatement, because you said you hope that a few of the things that you said, would resonate with us and, bring us to a thoughtful moment. And you pointed out so many very powerful ideas and thoughts that I think can be developed on. When Putin went into this thing, he called it a need for spiritual security, and that Ukraine and Russia were one. Albeit that he thought Russia was the dominant one, of course. So, very, very difficult situation. So just a few observations that I had there. And then with Father Tarass, again, a visceral, a personal story, generational priest in his family, confronting, the Second World War, a Nazi situation that we think would never happen again in this century. So, thank you for sharing your personal story. I think it interesting, in the Second World War, you had the swastika. In this one, we have the Z, which seems to be doing, a similar thing. So with those few words, I'll turn over to Darcia.
Yes, thanks, Gary. I echo Gary's comments, of course, and I'm so pleased to be here with you this evening, to hear both of you. You have touched my heart this evening, and with your wisdom and with your personal experiences both. Father John, I have maybe a question for you. We talk about what is the ethical response? What should the rest of the world be doing? And I know that, and I deal with ethics in my job as a lawyer, and that's my role where I work. I deal with ethics, and I was interested to hear your background in ethics, and I'm sure you've taught that for many years. When people say, well, what is the ethical response? And when looking to you, as a man of the cloth, do you say take up arms? We talk about, sometimes I feel so strongly about this, being of Ukrainian descent. 3 of my 4 grandparents came from Ukraine. I had the wonderful privilege to go there in 2006 and go to the villages where my grandparents came from. I met a second cousin and, of course, met Sophia. That's how she was a translator for us at the time. She was a 20 or 21-year-old student. And then later she got her master's degree in international relations, became a professor. And ultimately you heard the strong young woman she is today as an elected member of parliament in Ukraine. We're very proud of her. That's our personal connection to Sophia. But what do you say? I feel like I've said to my husband, I feel like I could get on a plane in a minute and go to Ukraine. And I feel I would have no difficulty taking up arms. And I sometimes shock myself when I say that. I'm Catholic all my life. You believe in love thy neighbor. And yet when I see what is happening there morally, as we noted, Ukraine has not been the aggressor. And of course the people there individually have the right to life and liberty. And also as a sovereign state, in terms of international laws and international norms, if we don't support the right of sovereign states to be sovereign, that's the underpinning of all of our, social fabrics and democracy worldwide. If we don't defend that, what else is there? People talk about, the threat of nuclear war. And I say, you know what? Everyone's so afraid of starting World War III. And my response is, people, it's already started. And what kind of world, this is, I guess, what I wrestle with myself, what kind of world are we trying to save for our children and grandchildren? Personally, if it's a world that can sit by and watch, and just watch and observe while this is happening, is that a world ultimately worth passing on to children and grandchildren? I ask that because where's the morality? Are we saving this world for a world where we can just sit back and watch and scroll through Twitter and watch babies being bombed? And it really offends me morally. So that's my question for you, Father John and Father Tarass. What is the moral response to this terrible situation?
Well, I think the first step is to really root into root in ourselves into the fundamental teaching that came from the Second Vatican Council in its statement on religious liberty, which included a strong affirmation of the basic human dignity of every person and the need to defend that. And we need to come to the point where we recognize, as Catholic Christians, that human rights and the defense of human rights as is a central tenet of our religious understanding and of our self-identity as Catholic men and women. I think this is very important, but it can't stay at the level merely of words. It's fine to declare the principles, and we need the principles, but we also need at times concrete action. And I would say, as difficult as it is for me, because I marched against the Vietnam War when I was a student and so on. I've been basically anti-war. I've been involved with the effort both of the U.S. bishops under Cardinal Bernardin, the late Cardinal Bernardin, to confront the question of war as a church, as well as a supporter of what some of the recent popes have said against this. But I feel like you in this particular case. I certainly support the right of self-defense because that is protecting human dignity. I think another point that struck me in the message we saw at the beginning from the member of the Ukrainian parliament was she was saying, we let it go too long. We did not. I helped found at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, together with a number of my colleagues, what was initially called the Commission on Genocide. And one of the issues we took up was Chechnya. I have to say we were hampered as a governmental agency in what we could do in that area because the Clinton Defense Department did not want us getting too involved in a sensitive issue with Russia. But we did mount an exhibit in the museum on what was occurring in Chechnya. And we let Chechnya go. We conveyed a message, I think, to Putin and his colleagues that they could do whatever they wanted in Chechnya. They could more or less do whatever they wanted in Syria. They could do whatever they wanted in Georgia. These were not areas that, unfortunately, the masses in Europe and North America had much concern about. And so we let it go. We kind of signaled to them, I think, that we can tolerate some attacks. But, Putin is just trying now on a mass scale the same war plan, if you want, the same tactics that he used in Chechnya, in Georgia, and in Syria. And I think he became convinced that, yes, they'll issue some statements, but when push comes to shove, they won't really do anything to stop me. And I think one issue that really comes up needs further discussion. You may recall that in Syria, President Obama, whom I admired greatly, but this may not have been his finest hour on this issue. I mean, he issued a red line, but when Putin crossed that red line, nothing happened. Nothing concrete happened. Yeah, there was a verbal condemnation and so on, but nothing really happened. And I think what the member of the Ukrainian parliament said is absolutely true. We gave him, I think, an opening to do what he's doing in Ukraine at the moment. And what I'm afraid may be prepared if he, thank God for the valiant Ukrainian fighters who seem to, but if he had just been simply successful, just kind of, if he was able to have run over the in a few days, captured the Ukraine, I think he might very well have considered moving on to Poland, to Moldova, to the Baltic states, and so on. And I think we also didn't respond sufficiently when he first, in 2014, when he invaded the Donbas. I think one of the things, and I think the religious community has to be involved in this, and certainly it's something I learned in my work at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum. We just have to stand up and protest at the very beginning. We have spoken at the museum of what we call an early warning system. We need to create a kind of early warning system when we begin to see signs of a possible genocide. And we must give attention, both people from the secular side, from the political science side, if you want, from the diplomatic side, but also from the side of religious ethics. How do we create a mechanism that enables us to stop the spreading of the seeds of genocide before they really grow into a vast calamity? And I think that is something that we are going to have to reflect upon in light of the response to the Ukraine and what I consider to be the undue hesitancy of my own government on the issue, for example, of the jets. Poland may not have handled that situation all that well, the way they announced it. But the point is, I think that risk shouldn't be, because it looks like it looks as though any state that gets nuclear weaponry then can do what it wants, because people will be afraid of starting another nuclear war. And so rather than, in my opinion, rather than having nuclear weapons as a deterrent, it becomes not a deterrent to a nuclear war, but it becomes a deterrent to the exercise of moral responsibility at a somewhat lesser level of conflict. And we cannot just sit idly by and just let him bomb every major city in the Ukraine to smithereens. So I think it's another moral imperative.
Father
Thank
John, you came out with a concrete thing that might be possible, and that was with the World Council of Churches, and actually trying to see if they would take this seriously and seek a suspension of the Russian Orthodox Church. That is something that could be attempted. Very powerful.
I think it could, and I would say, I think the Vatican should give serious consideration to breaking its political relationship with Russia, or at least suspending it, asking the ambassador to leave.
Might it be reasonable to ask that Putin be excommunicated?
Well, that would be something that the Russian Orthodox Church would have to do. Whether the Russian Orthodox Church in the Ukraine would want to do that is another question. Just a little vignette. I was, one of my visits to Ukraine was as a member of the presidential delegation to Babi Yar, to the 50th anniversary commemoration of Babi Yar. And at the reception, one night. What is it? The Winter or Summer Palace?
I think it's the Winter Palace.
What?
I think it's the Winter.
Winter, yeah. There were three. Beside myself, there were three priests at the reception, and one was from the Moscow Patriarchate. One was from the more. It wasn't officially autonomous, but the more freedom-loving part of the indigenous Ukrainian church, and then another representative from another small body of the Ukrainian church. I didn't quite understand where they fit, but when we were in the room, all three of them did everything possible to stand as far as they could from each other. And whenever one of them moved, the other two would move, so they would still be as far as possible. I really think, actually, in terms of the Ukraine, and it's unfortunate that it had to. It's even almost hard to say that this has any good side to it. But I think it's united the wider Christian community in a way that has not always been the case in Ukraine, even on the Christian side. I don't need to tell you some of the conflicts, but I experienced that conflict on a very small scale some years ago when one of my cousins was getting married, and she was getting married in a Polish church in Chicago, and the Monsignor said she had a friend who was a member of the Ukrainian Cathedral Parish in Chicago, and she wanted her in the wedding party, and the Polish Monsignor said that she could be in the wedding party, but she'd have to sit by herself down in the pews. She couldn't sit in the sanctuary.
Wow.
Right.
Absolutely nonsense, but it was that kind of, that hostility existed, and some of it, I think, now has kind of disappeared, whether it hopefully permanently, but it's unfortunate that had to happen via this physical attack.
Well, I heard you have a call for unity and a call for action here, some concrete action. And Kauser, maybe you want to take it from there?
Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Gary and Darcia, for raising brilliant questions. I just would like to invite Father Taras Koch briefly, if you would like to share your thoughts or the point that Darcia raised. What is the limit of moral and ethical responsibility of us, those who are outside Ukraine? So, Father Taras, do you want to comment on that point very briefly? We are at the end of this session. Please go ahead, sir.
Well, morally, we're all trying to help our people who are coming here to not only to Winnipeg, but to Canada, United States. And I think that we have to open up our churches. We need to open up our homes. We need to find them homes. We need to find them jobs. And we are working on that in all our churches here in Winnipeg. And we have fundraisers, and we have much, donations for medical supplies and clothing and all those things that we're trying to help morally to help these people who are really, really going through a hard time. So and we pray a lot. Like I said, we need to pray. We need to help people and let them know that we're there for them. And that's morally what we need to do as Christians, as God-loving people.
Thank you, Father, very much for your remarks. Dear audience, we are at the end of our session today. And before I formally conclude, let me express our gratitude to both the distinguished scholars and faith leaders, Reverend John Pawlikowski from Chicago and Father Taras Koch from Winnipeg, for being with us and sharing their wonderful and thoughts. Dear audience, let me also share with you the fact that in 2019, a group of Ukrainian Orthodox churches broke away from Moscow Patriarchy. And at that time, it's very recent, 2019, 3 years ago, and Patriarch Bartholomew of Constantinople, considered by most of the Orthodox Church as highest authority, and he gave the Ukrainian Church a Tomos, a holy scroll, granting its independence from the Orthodoxy, and it happened after 1686. And this breakaway and split in Orthodoxy is also had geopolitical ramifications. Ukraine's former president Petro Poroshenko said in 2018, I quote, "The independence of our church is part of our pro-European and pro-Ukrainian policies," unquote. And this is also said that by breaking away from the Russian Orthodox Church, the new Orthodox Church of Ukraine was seen as being the threat to the spiritual security of Russia. So this is what we saw, and this is why this discussion is so important. Dear audience, we have been blessed today and this evening hearing from religious leaders and scholars, as I already mentioned. Reverend John very clearly said that it's a disgrace of Moscow Patriarchy, and of course he recommended a number of actions, for example, World Council of Churches to ban Moscow Patriarchy, at least suspend them, and also he requested and submitted that Pope should be possibly using some strong words, and also he mentioned a very interesting point that possibly some of us are not aware, watching day and night the online coverage of the war in Ukraine, that we have not heard any abuse of Russian soldiers, the invaders, the aggressors within the soil of Ukraine in the hands of Ukrainian soldiers. This is absolutely a fascinating fact that Reverend John shared with us. And he also said that he stands for the, and he understands the church's standpoint in warfare, and he also emphasized strongly on the morally acceptable way of warfare. And he said that it is a one-sided vicious attack. Is not the war that two states join together. Father Koch shared with us his wonderful legacy of his family in terms of saving people's life, which is interesting in this particular year 2022. We are back again, and we are trying to save lives from within Ukraine and outside. The audience, as a member of the Islamic faith, I also join and echo with the sage words of two of our distinguished panelists today. And I would like to mention here that there is something we study in peace and conflict discipline, that the just war concept, the jus et bellum and jus in bello. I mean, in this case, both these concepts are absolutely important to understand and see whether the parties are adhering to it. And we possibly don't see both of these concepts applicable for Russian Federation to invade Ukraine, and in the process demolishing civilian infrastructures and killing innocent civilians. And of course, from the Islamic faith point of view, let me quote Surah Al-Hajj, verse 39 from Holy Quran. And I quote here, it said that to those against whom war is made, permission is given to fight, for they have been oppressed, and verily Allah is well able to assist them, unquote. So the concept of self-defense is accepted in possibly all the religions of world faith. And particularly, I am no pacifist as well, and I understand what Reverend John Pawlikowski rightly mentioned here. And of course, in Quran, it is rightly said that do not transgress in conducting war, although it has been made permissible for self-defense, but do not transgress. And this is what is very important when we watch the conduct of the war right in front of our eyes. And of course, we would like to end our session today. And before I end, let me share one of the upcoming events that our viewers and followers can and would like to attend. As you see, World Vision has a night and it is going to happen on Saturday, April 9th at 7 p.m. Bethel Community Church, 430 Lakewood Boulevard, Winnipeg, Manitoba. If you are free, if you are willing, please do come and attend the session. The audience, I would like to finally close the session by wishing Member of Parliament Sophia Fedina's well-being, security, and safety. Our hearts goes out to her, and we always wish her safety so that she fights, as Darcia Sanford rightly mentioned, with a weapon and her intelligence and her presence of mind right in the Ukraine. Thank you very much. Please do join in our next episode, which is going to be aired very soon, and follow us in Twitter and Facebook and our YouTube channel. Till then, be safe, and our prayers with all the Ukrainians, those who are suffering one of the most ignoble war in the history of humanity. Thank you, and good night for all of you. Bye-bye.